Hey, everybody. So, like she said, my name is Kacey Coughlin. I'm a web developer / designer on LinkedIn's internal tools team down in Mountain View. One day we will get slides up. You guys all excited about technical debt? Yay. Yeah. Yeah, me too. So, how was your night? How are things? How are things going?
How are you?
I'm fabulous. I couldn't be better. That was a lie. I could be a lot better. No worries. Should I unplug it and plug it back in? Turn it off and turn it back on?
Oh, hey. I like your sticker on your apple.
Oh, why, thank you. Yeah, hey. High five. All right. Yes. Confirmed. We are plugged in. I went to all the trouble to make slides. This is what happened. I'm just kidding. So, yeah. Toronto. How many people are from here? Just curious. So mostly Canadians. Awesome. I'm not one of you. I've been trying to learn your language. Sorry. JavaScript. That was a big one yesterday. Or maybe I should. Yeah. It's not even acting like plugged in. Oh. Things are happening. Yes, maybe. Yes, okay. So now it sees the other monitor. Yay. Just kidding. That wasn't my fault. Okay. Sweet. All right. So, yeah, technical debt. Not terribly sexy, I know. And a lot of this might be glaringly obvious to some of you. But in case you're one of the few people that has been, hey, WTF on this technical debt, or you've mistakenly wandered in here from a night of binge drinking, or somehow you're still here from yesterday, then this talk is for you. Yay. So, in this beautiful 45 minutes we have together, what will we go over? Here's a list. The basic who, what, where, when, how, documentation, even sexier. It gets better. So, yeah, don't worry. There won't be a quiz at the end. Or will there? So what is technical debt? Well, it turns out it's a lot of things, generally, and a few things specifically. First off, it's a metaphor that we kind of created to be able to talk about these issues with non-technical people. Everybody, I hope, every adult understands debt, so that's a good metaphor to use. And it refers to the eventual consequences of any program or system. Eventual, because it's usually not obvious at first, and that's when people tend to get around to it, eventually. It's cleanup work, let's be honest. Usually due to taking shortcuts, like using a hack to get the product shipped faster, and when writing a more elegant solution at first. Essentially, you're delaying V2 to expedite V1 in a product. This isn't usually the sole cause, but it's kind of a biggie. So, you see, when a mommy and daddy love each other very much, they will introduce a change into the code base. And when that happens, it often requires other changes to be made elsewhere in the program. Also docs. These changes, triggered if left ignored, can grow up to be a big, strong technical debt. And so on and so forth, kind of a domino effect if you ignore it long enough. For every modification, the level of complexity grows, obviously, and with it, entropy. Yay! The tech debt begets software entropy, which is bad. But Kacey, what is software entropy? It's the measure of a system or program's disorder or complexity. The thing is, though, you can't really reduce entropy. You can curb it, or you can increase it, but you don't want to do that, really. I thought this was fairly interesting at a 2012 Agile Research Forum. Ipekosgaya, I'm going to butcher that, explained it this way. A little debt speeds up development, and as long as it's beneficial, as long as the debt is beneficial, it paid back promptly with a rewrite that reduces complexity and streamlines future enhancements. I think this sums it up nicely. If you're going to push forward, know what you're getting into. You could say that about a lot of things, but especially this. A lot of times the business side either doesn't understand technical debt or doesn't understand what might need to happen immediately after launch. So you kind of have to be the advocate, make them aware of that. Just recently, this study by the Software Engineering Institute at Carnegie Mellon was published. They asked 1,831 developers and engineers about technical debt. The results for the question, what most contributes to technical debt, I thought was fairly interesting. Keeping in mind, all these participants have an average of 6 years or more experience in the industry. And far and away, you can see most people consider the biggest contributor to technical debt to be architectural choices, such as module dependencies, external dependencies, maybe even team dependencies. Diving in a little deeper, they asked the participants about a specific architectural elements being the most significant to tech debt. Again, bad choices being the leader here, but then we can see inadequate testing, lack of documentation, and even obsolete technology as huge factors contributing to tech debt. So, I mean, looking at this, obviously, if we could just stop making bad choices, people, we'll be all good, right? Another interesting article I found by Francis Lash. He has a huge technical debt blog. This article was the short-term memory of lessons learned in technical debt. Touched on some interesting things. When the Wall Street Journal's website is offline for an hour due to a technical issue, we're pretty annoyed. When planes are grounded across the country due to a network issue at United Airlines, we are baffled. And when the New York Stock Exchange is unable to trade for 4 hours due to a computer glitch, we can see a trend. And this brings up an interesting point, too. What are computer glitches and technical issues really referring to? We know them as bugs, but how do bugs really occur if not for obsolete technology, inadequate testing, essentially tech debt? If you're cognizant and taking care of your system or program, ideally, let's be real, it's never going to not happen, but ideally in systems this big and this important, things like a computer glitch shouldn't be happening. So let's take a quick look at a simple little example of this. It's not the New York Stock Exchange, but it'll do for an example. Here we have just a simple little contact form. Now, if I were the PM on this, I might, say, be more concerned with cost and time than elegance and sustainability or even extensibility. And since this works, we'll go with it. It just needs to work, and that's it. But now the designer wants to make some changes, change the whole look and feel, add a new theme, so I need new styles. So I hire this new kid to implement the new theme as quickly as possible. He said he's new to web dev, but he could get it done. He just added in some classes for the new theme. He had a little trouble with the submit button, but that's okay. He just wrote some inline styles. What's wrong with that, right? And it works. That's all I need. Ship it. Great. Everything is awesome. I have my new theme. Great. But wait. Now I keep getting emails with no names. I need some form validation in here, somehow to force people to fill out that name field when they submit the form. Bam! Form validation. Sweet. I saved so much money. It just went right in, and it's great, and I have validation. But wait, now I want to move to handlebars because it's so trendy and everybody's doing it. So let's make a template. Yay! And now I want to be semantic because that's a super buzzy word. But I don't really know what that means, so I just added some roles to the buttons, and it's all great because it works. Let's ship it. But I need to save some more money, so I fired my designer. But that's okay. We'll just add Bootstrap. And yeah. Okay, so this is a fairly simple example. It's still a fairly simple contact form, but already it's gotten pretty complex. There's a ton that we can cut out at this point. We can make this so much more lightweight, readable. The form is bloated, ugly, and probably pretty slow at this point. Everything that's in the red, most of what's in the red, can be stripped down or even removed entirely at this point. We're not using half of those classes anymore. Why does this happen? Well, it happens for a number of reasons. This can and does happen maybe because the programmer or engineer just doesn't know. Maybe you hired someone with more back-end experience that's not so hot on CSS. So you get a lot of inline styles. They throw some Bootstrap in there because, hey, that just gives you styles for free, right? Maybe there's a gap in your process. Perhaps the business side is unaware of what technical debt is and is pressuring engineers to move on. Making decisions without considering future needs and implications will almost always come back to haunt you. If devs are writing code faster than they can review it, that sounds good, right? Why do we have code reviews in the first place? Screw it. We can just ship it with forced hacks, and it'll work, and it'll be great, and we'll ship a month early, and stockholders will totally be happy with us. We don't need to have clean testable code or anything. Why write unit tests? Nobody likes doing that. Oh, wait. We do need to write unit tests. I know. It's my least favorite part of the job as well. But believe it or not, writing unit tests ensures that your code actually runs as expected. And you can actually uncover bugs before you ship. Imagine that. This comes in doubly handy if you are developing your front end and your back end in parallel, making sure both sides are synced up. I know under a time crunch, a lot of times we will have the front end and back end run in parallel. Seems in theory like a good idea. Everybody knows what they need to do. They write their code, they come back and they commit, and everybody's great. Except for when you do the product review and then you find out that they wanted an email to trigger or tracking codes and nobody told you because you're off in your own little worlds. And you wanted to do what with that cookie? All right. So, are you using industry standards? Are you using open source libraries or rolling your own? Most of these things will have to happen eventually. And so if you're not doing them at the beginning, or at least making time for it, it's going to be tech debt later, most likely. Taking advantage of open source libraries saves time in that you're not writing it all yourself. And there's a good chance a lot of the bugs have already been ironed out. If you decide to shoehorn that library in afterwards, it's going to be a lot more difficult. Like I said, create a lot more debt. It's just going to take a lot more time. And finally, delaying the inevitable. Remember that code cleanup you said you were going to do right after launch? That ticket for spring cleaning that you've been ignoring and kicking down the road and pushing off until a later date? Yeah, you should get on that. But let's make sure it's the right code that you're cleaning up. Sometimes, once a code cleanup has finally been picked up and committed to, it might not be the right code cleanup. It might be a little trivial piece that's in a part of the code base that isn't touched every day. Making sure you have your priorities straight and you are cleaning up the right code that might pay down the most debt. Say you're debating on taking care of the number of nesting levels in your SAS files, or maybe replacing your jQuery animates with CSS transitions. The latter is probably going to be far more beneficial in the short term and pay down the most debt and give you the most reward overall. Though it may seem like it at this point, tech debt and keeping up with it is not a losing battle. There's a lot you can do to keep it at bay. In a lot of circumstances, you will have to be the advocate for it, though. You will have to stand up, and you will have to push back on your PMs or your clients and say, look, this code is messy. We need to take care of this. There's some old things in here. We need to do some updates. We should stop and do that before we even move on with features A, B, and C. And just saying it works is not enough. I know we all do this. I do this. QA comes up, they say something's wrong, you say you can't replicate it, or worse, you tell them, it's fine in dev, it's fine on my box, you should go back and try it again on your box. That's horrible. QA doesn't like that, and we shouldn't be doing that either. We should own our own code and hold ourselves and others to a higher standard. So let's talk about code refactoring. What does that mean? Code refactoring is an effort to keep entropy to a minimum. Again, it's code cleanup, essentially. It's you going back through your code, or someone else's, line by line, and removing anything that's no longer needed or necessary or even being used. That goes for everything. Something as simple and small as removing a class from a button on up to an entire library. I mean, are you really using jQuery UI? No, you can probably drop that. And this can actually be done at any time. Personally, a lot of times if I'm fixing a bug or writing a new feature or I'm in existing code for some reason and I see something, I will do something. It's like, calling 311. If you see something, say something. Even little stuff like hoisting variables, using CSS shorthand instead of writing 3 extra lines. It all adds up. Little by little, you're making progress towards the eventual goal of having beautiful, elegant code. And a lot of times, if there's a part of the program that hasn't been touched on a regular basis, that's a good place to start. I mean, how's your 404 page looking? If you're like us, just recently, that had some pretty old dead links on it. I mean, is there a function in your code base that might have been written by one of the founders 14 years ago? I hope not, because that would be weird. Who would do that? Code refactoring should only restructure existing code without changing external behavior. If you're getting some weird pop-ups or some unexpected behaviors, obviously you're doing it wrong. Improving readability of the code, reducing unneeded or unnecessary complexity, having adequate separation of concerns, this all leads to more maintainable, testable code, as well as less tech debt. And that's really the eventual goal. So let's take another look at our beautiful and or disgusting example of ours. How could we make this cleaner? How on earth could this be more readable? Well, believe it or not, there's actually a lot we can do. We can remove a lot of the classes. We can remove a lot of those wrapper divs that Bootstrap likes to put in there. Maybe even leverage placeholder tags instead of labels. We can probably remove a lot of, or all of those IDs. I mean, how often do you really need IDs? And a lot of the classes in general. With handlebars, text type inputs are default. Same with the submit type, so we can remove those. Personally, I try to keep my markup to a bare minimum. If I can get away with not adding a class, great. Like I said, you rarely need IDs unless, a function needs to call it directly. And speaking of logic, if we put that in a separate file, look at that. So fresh and so clean. It's beautiful. A lot of code can also be made easier and simpler, easier to read and cleaner by not overthinking it. not over-engineering it. This tends to happen a lot. Not really, I don't know why, but a lot of people like to write really loopy functions that are very complex and very hard to debug. Spoiler alert, if no one can understand your code, you're not a badass. There's an old saying, testing is twice as hard as writing the code. So if you write your code to be as clever as you are, then you'll never be able to debug it. So now we kind of know what to look for, but how can we track it? How do we know that we're doing it right, paying down this debt? Well, most people will make JIRA tickets or bug tickets or inline to-dos in the code. If you're in an Agile Scrum world, you will usually have these tickets in a backlog to either be pulled out when there's time, i.e. never, or towards the end of the epic or the end of the year. These tickets usually try to create them as you're thinking about them. If I'm in code and I see, I don't know, something like super long method names or anything, if I'm thinking about it, don't put it off until you're done writing the feature. You know, it doesn't take any time to just shoot off a ticket right then. Maybe shoot an email or just even like an inline to-do to remind yourself to come back to it later. Maybe you have a whole epic that's dedicated to cleaning up tech debt. I know we do, and so you can easily add tickets to that. Some things will be constants, software updates and upgrades, for example. Some tech debt may not even be exposed until a new, more experienced person joins the team. Then you're kind of fucked. And that brings us to documentation. Yay! Sexy topics all around. So for some reason, it's a lot harder to write the document than that explains your code than to actually write the code. Weird, I know. It's like doing the laundry or cleaning your room. It's not nearly as fun as writing the app and finally solving that weird routing issue that you've been banging your head against the wall for 6 hours, but it has to be done nonetheless. And despite the small minority of folks that actually enjoys writing tech docs, they actually benefit everyone. It might save you some debt in the future. How, you ask? Well, planning, obviously. Take a couple of extra days. Hell, take an entire sprint and really plan out how long a project is going to take. Now inflate those numbers and add in another sprint for tech debt and code refactoring. Ideally, if you account for that time on the front end, you will save a lot more of that time and stress on the back end. Say, worst case scenario, you budget in for more time for code refactoring, the project goes over, probably because of environmental issues, and then you have that extra time to finish the product, and then do code refactoring. And scope creep. We all have had, or have, a PM, client, director, whatever, that has adjusted or added in or just blown up the product scope while you were working on it. You don't need me to tell you that that sucks. And it happens a lot, more than it should, even in big companies when you think everybody's got it all figured out. And I'm not saying the documentation will save you from this ever happening, but it's a pretty good weapon to have as backup to push back on that client or PM. And sometimes that's enough, just saying, hey, this is the product spec, we need to keep to this. Oftentimes, though, I've needed to take pretty detailed notes on exactly how many improvements and times that we've gone back to the drawing board. And after 2 or 3, that has been enough to push back and say, look, we've already done this a couple times. We're out of time. We're not going to make any more improvements. That's all going to be V2. And finally, defining ownership. I cannot tell you how many times I've gone into code and cannot track down an owner. Not because they've left the company, but because it's just changed hands so many times. People rotate to other teams, and then by the time you're working on a bug, nobody knows who owns that code or who wrote it, because even the names and the annotations are not the owners anymore. And there's no docs, or the wiki for the service doesn't exist. Knowing who owns the service or part of the code base will benefit you immensely. How? Well, like I said, if you're trying to fix a bug, knowing who actually wrote the code and being able to talk to them, I know, ideal situation, will help you fix it a lot faster and get on with your day. And more importantly, if you are the owner, then great. You want those people to be able to find you so you can explain to them so then they can go off and do your work for you. You can just push it off on them, and then you can continue doing whatever it is you are doing, and they can fix your bugs and your old code, and everybody's happy. Win-win. So I am way faster in this talk than I was planning on being. Essentially, to wrap all this up, I just want to point out that I know a lot of this are ideal situations, and we all may or may not work for companies that have a lot of these policies in place. I know I work in Silicon Valley, and a lot of this is ideal, but companies, this all can be done, and it all takes time to learn and kind of take up. We can't all have an N-1 browser policy, but eventually, if you're the advocate for it, then you can. Be good owners, do what you can, implement what you can, go forth and change lives and code bases. My name is Kacey Coughlin. I work at LinkedIn. I'm Kacey Queso on Twitter. Do we have any questions? I am way ahead of time. Tell me you have questions. Yes?
You mentioned being able to identify the owner of the code. Do you consider whoever signed the commit to be a valid method of identifying?
So that's a good question. As far as identifying the owner of the code, whoever signed the commit to be the owner, not necessarily. So I mentioned annotations. A lot of times you'll look and see who committed this code. And even sometimes in one function, there might be several hands that touched it. So it's hard to identify an owner just based on who pushed the code last or ever. So yes and no. Sometimes it will be, and those are definitely good places to start on whoever was on the RB, whoever was on or the code review, whoever committed the code or is in the annotations. It's a place to start if you have absolutely no idea who the owner is. But it may not be. They may have just been like you, trying to fix a bug, but it's a place to start. They might have a better understanding of the code than you do at that point. So, yep.
You mentioned having an epic for tracking technical debt.
Uh-huh.
Do you do that by product, or is that just how do you isolate and not make an epic so big that it's not manageable?
Yeah, good question. As far as making an epic for tracking tech debt, do you do it by team or product? I've seen it done a few different ways. I've seen it done by product, and I've seen it done by team. At LinkedIn, we do it by both, kind of. So even within a team, there'll be different services, there'll be different modules or widgets, and so we start by team and then kind of break it down, depending on how big the service is or the page or product. You might want to break it down just to be more manageable, or if your whole site or app is small enough, you could just have one epic just kind of on the side, parallel to everything else that tracks just tech debt. Like most things, it just depends on your team and your product. whatever kind of feels right. However, maybe you make epics now for improving products that are by product, and so that would make more sense. Or if it's by team, then maybe that makes more sense, depending on your environment. Yeah.
How do you overcome the challenges of getting people to understand your tech debt and addressing
How do you overcome challenges in explaining tech debt? I find examples are really good. If you're in the code base and you see whatever, if it's raising red flags to you, then you should be bubbling that up to your management and what have you. And I will generally just show them the code. I will say, look, this shouldn't be here. This could be done way better. Does this huge, 66,000 line document feel good to you? So I will generally use a lot of examples. If your manager or scrum master or whoever you're talking to isn't very technical, maybe use more metaphors or analogies, more financial terms, I don't know. But yeah, you can probably do a compare and contrast too, with your code base, and maybe find, say, another project you worked on, or even just another piece of code on GitHub, and just be like, look, this is what we should strive for, and maybe not this. Yeah?
Do you have a favorite horror story that led to some changes in your approach to tech debt?
Yeah, so I'm working on one right now. In internal tools, believe it or not. It's full of horror stories. I can't really go into detail on any of it, but you would be surprised how bad some of that code is. And being internal, it seems like we don't need to worry about security or cross-site scripting or accessibility or anything, or having inline JavaScript or inline styles all over the place. Yeah. Yep.
What are some of the tools you use to know which parts of the application you're going to tackle first regarding tech debt?
Yeah, as far as prioritizing what you're going to tackle first for tech debt.
Do you just look at the code and say, oh, this is ugly, or?
So, yeah, kind of both. Either, if you're already in the code and it's just bothering you because it's such a mess, or if there's a particular piece that is really used a lot or kind of vital to the application or product. Say there's something you can do to really benefit or speed up bandwidth and page load time. That would be a really good place to start. You don't want to start refactoring too much, if it's a vital service. Obviously, you don't want to bring it down. But if there's something in a front-end service that's used, say, on the homepage or something every day that could easily be refactored to just speed up everything, that would be a good place to start. Otherwise, if there is a particular place and you have some extra time that just could really use a good cleanup, maybe separate out, stuff from your SAS files into more modular components that are easier to consume and reuse. Again, it all kind of depends on your environment and your product. Yeah.
To answer that, another beneficial way to target things through refactoring, if you've got something critical that a lot of other things talk to, and you find that something to do with that, whether it's difficult to understand or it's making the rest of development slower, refactoring that one thing that a lot of other things interact with can speed up everything else you're working on.
Yeah. If there's a service that is particularly loopy in its code and a lot of people are spending way too much time trying to debug it, then maybe rewriting that would speed things up for everybody that touches it. Yeah.
So in the event, like, for example, your lead developer is projected to leave the company, how long should we, for example, like,
Yeah, right. No, just hypothetically.
how long should we spend on project handoff?
Yeah. How much time should you spend on project handoff? That's a good question. And again, I'm sad to say it probably depends on the project or the product or your company, how many people you have. Generally, we will try to spend about 2 weeks or a sprint working, at least one person, if not a couple, working directly hand in hand with that person who's leaving to kind of try to absorb as much as possible. It's almost the same situation as when you're new to a company and you might spend a sprint or a month or 2 months, working side by side with somebody to learn all the services and the product and how they do things. The same thing happens when somebody's leaving, especially like a lead or somebody vital. You kind of need to do that same ramp down as you would a ramp up coming onto the team. But yeah, again, depending on your product or service, that time may take longer or maybe shorter. Yeah.
Using your example from before, if you were faced with adding, say, another field to that form, and you came across it and discovered, oh, this is a mess. How do you track the changes to tackle technical debt in conjunction with a new feature or change that you're trying to add? Do you track them separately, or would you add the new feature and refactor it at the same time, or do you split those out and track them separately?
So yeah, in terms of tracking something that you're currently working on and needing to refactor, I personally do them in parallel because I've had times where I put it off until after I write the feature, and then you totally forget because another fire comes out and you get pulled in several directions. So I will try to make notes, even if it's just on a sticky note on your desk, something to do it in parallel, especially if it's something small like you just need to change copy or add an input field or something. Maybe you probably may not know what classes to pull out, but simple no-brainer things like maybe pulling out some of the logic if it's in line and putting it in a separate sheet. Little things like that I will do at the same time that I'm writing the new feature, just because I don't want to forget, and it helps out others too. If you just put in that input field and then ship it and then ignore it, the next guy that comes along is going to be like, what the hell? And then your name is on it because you committed that code, and then they're going to come back to you and be like, did you write this garbage? So you don't want that. Yeah, so it's as much to kind of, I don't want to say cover your butt, but also just to help everybody else out. Even if it's just a little bit, do what you can. Be a good owner. Yeah.
Follow up. Is there a measure of how much the changes are? What I mean by that is, if the feature is just simply add a new field, and then someone comes and takes a look at your commit for adding a new field, and everything has changed because you
definitely. If you're making a lot of changes, definitely make another ticket just to kind of explain that. So say you have a ticket for the new feature, and you go in and it needs a lot of cleanup. Make another ticket for code cleanup or refactoring or something, and then put both of those tickets on the code review or the commit. That's what I would do, but definitely, or somewhere in the commit comments or something, say like added blah, 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 but also did all of these things because yeah, like you said, somebody else comes along and it looks like you just deleted a bunch of stuff. That looks crappy too. So yeah, somewhere document it. Even just as simple as a commit message, people read those, and so those can be really helpful. Anybody else? We have 5 minutes. Yes.
You mentioned on a statistical report about that the bad architecture choice was the reason for the technical debt.
Mm-hmm.
How do you measure when you're choosing a framework, a library, or being an open source, closed source?
Yeah.
Being whether it will be a technical debt or it will be a means of reducing the technical debt.
Yeah, so how do you know beforehand when you're choosing architectures that it'll be a bad choice?
Like whether its library or framework is maintained enough.
Yeah.
Or it has a
So if it's open source, it's pretty easy to tell how many people are contributing to it, how it's being maintained, when was the last update to it. Most of that stuff will be on GitHub, and you can just kind of track issues, for that library or that service, that API, see, okay, well, this has got thousands of people working on it, and the last issue was raised and closed like a couple hours ago. That would be a good example, unless if there's another case where that hasn't been the case for a year or more, maybe not choose that one. It's hard to say what will be a bad choice before you make it, obviously. Some things can be obvious if they're not backed by other companies. By that I mean some open source stuff and some libraries and APIs will be in use by a lot of big companies or just a lot of companies in general that you can kind of use to gauge not just popularity, but how is that working out for them? Is company A using this service and their product looks pretty solid and is working well for them? Great. If company A is using that service and it's a shit show, maybe not use that service. So what's kind of being used in the industry is a good gauge. A lot of times when you're sitting down to refactor something or completely rewrite it, and you're at that point where you're deciding what architecture to go with and what services to use, usually most people will spend a pretty lengthy discussion and maybe even a month or more just researching what architectures, what other people are using, what their experience was. Maybe a lot of people are using Marionette, but they really hate it. All of those are things to consider, and what works best for your company. As a small example, right now at LinkedIn, we're moving everything to Ember, and that took a long time to even decide to use Ember. But we came to the point where it was just the right call to make because it is so opinionated. And we had a lot of teams internally either rolling their own stuff or kind of going rogue and just writing whatever, or multiple widgets that were essentially the same but being rewritten in different ways internally. And so with a more opinionated framework that hopefully will be taken care of, because there's really only one way to write it, and it needs to be this way, and so everybody just needs to fall in line. And that will have some pain points in the beginning, but later on when you're switching teams or somebody new comes on, everything's the same, and it's much easier and quicker to ramp up on. All right. We're out of time. Is it quick?
Real quick.
Okay.
Just wondering if you can share your slides or
No.
those studies.
No. Okay, fine. I'm pretty sure they will all be available. I'm being recorded. Somehow through the conference, they'll make that announcement or something. All right, I'm Kacey. If you have any more questions, I'll be here all day. Thanks.